Welcome to the PUTTcast podcast by Pharmacists United for Truth and Transparency. To learn more about our mission, visit our website at truthrx.org.
Hi, and welcome to this very special episode of the PUTTcast, podcast brought to you by Pharmacists United for Truth and Transparency. I am your co-host, Lauren Young, Vice President of PUTT, and I'm joined by my wonderful co-host, Monique Whitney, our illustrious Executive Director at PUTT.
Thanks for calling me illustrious.
I love our time at the PUTTcast, Monique. I get to really kind of pull back the curtain and we get to talk about some of my favorite things in the pharmacy realm that are a little more exciting than just the PBM monsters that we fight every single day. This episode is sponsored by our friends at DataScan Pharmacy Software Services, so make sure you go ahead and check them out. And we have one of our favorite friends from the American Economic Liberties Project, Emma Freer. How are you, Emma?
Hi, Lauren. Hi, Monique. I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
You are the Senior Fellow for Healthcare at AELP. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm one of them.
So we get to see your name a lot whenever we are discussing a lot of the federal legislation. And you came out with a wonderful article that Monique has not stopped talking about since it came out. And really, we know that there are so many different pieces to this healthcare puzzle, but I will let Monique take this one on because your article about Optum UHC being a bank is really something that should be on everyone's radar.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. And Emma, thanks for jumping on about this topic. We were at the Breakup Big Medicine Coalition kickoff, and I got a copy, Emma, of your article, and I was reading it on the airplane on the way back, and I was beside myself with rage while I was reading it. I did not actually know that there was a formal bank function at UnitedHealth. You know, I think we all remember the Change Healthcare had that big cyber attack. And then we all started hearing rumors about, oh, United could make you a loan if you needed to make payroll. And they had these ridiculous interest rates. But it never occurred to me that they had a bank behind that operation. That the bank had been there for a lot longer than the Affordable Care Act has been around. It dates back to, I want to say the George W. Bush administration. It might even have been a little bit before that. Is that right?
Yeah, it was chartered in 2003, so it's more than 20 years old now.
Yeah, and it started as a health savings account.
Mm-hmm.
Or I think that was the initial idea, right? Health savings accounts. And even that, even the practices there, shocking. So we're going to talk about this today. I just would love to know just what was the defining incident for you that had you want to take this particular topic on?
Yeah, well, thank you for inviting me to chat more about it. I also find this whole situation really outrageous. And we think a lot about how we can kind of expose the problem of vertical integration in the healthcare industry. And, UnitedHealth Group is really the worst offender when it comes to this. And I think, fortunately, because of the good work that y'all have done at PUTT and a lot of other provider groups have done, there's a lot more awareness of the really serious harms that arise when health insurers are vertically integrated with healthcare providers and with other middlemen like PBMs. But UnitedHealth Group in particular has almost 2,700 subsidiaries. They expand into all these different areas. And the more I was learning about the bank and their financial services operation, it felt like kind of a way into telling this bigger story of how extreme this vertical consolidation has gotten and the really underreported breadth of harms that also arise from this arrangement. And after the Change Healthcare cyber attack, there was a lot of good reporting in the press about particularly independent physician practices that were decimated by this claims processing cyber attack. It completely shut down their cash flow. It affected, hospitals and pharmacies, not just independent medical providers, but UnitedHealth Group, I think in an attempt to kind of respond to this crisis, of its subsidiary that was, largely its own fault. It didn't have multi-factor authentication, which is just like having a backup email for your password, basically. Didn't have that. Huge operations. More than half of all healthcare claims are going to this system. It gets attacked, and they started offering loans to physician practices. And these loans were not really up to the task of helping these practices survive financially, but it did expose the fact that UnitedHealth Group was in a position to extend loans and how they had grown what had started as kind of like a localized HSA provider operation into a much more ambitious banking operation. And that was kind of the impetus for the paper. And since it came out late last year, I think UnitedHealth Group has even grown its ambitions a little bit more. Now, a lot of its AI push is through its data and financial services subsidiary, Optum Insight. And so this really concerning combination of claims processing and data analytics, where they have a lot of surveillance power over not just patients, but also healthcare providers, and all of the billing information that exists in our healthcare ecosystem, is fueling this financial services operation where they are, in charge of patients' health savings accounts and increasingly in charge of lending to healthcare providers that are driven into financial distress by United Healthcare's very own practices. So in a way, you almost have to admire the extremity of this business model and how much of a closed circuit it is, but it is also, I think, really alarming and really exposes the harms of vertical consolidation, particularly in the threat that it poses to independent healthcare providers that we know are closing down. We know we want to preserve them. We know that they provide higher quality, lower cost care. And this, I think, is kind of like a way into that threat.
What was the response when you published this initially? So I read this paper this summer. You published it last winter, December 2025. I'm curious what you heard as feedback, if you heard back from the medical profession, if they were like, yes, oh my gosh, thank you, this is what's happening.
Yeah, well, so when it came out, I think, like you were saying, a lot of people just didn't understand the banking operation, and I didn't really understand it until I spent, a couple months really digging into it. I think this really falls under the radar in large part because there are so many fires going on in healthcare. And it's very important to look at the problems of PBMs. It's very important to look at the problems of medical loss ratio exploitation. It's very important to look at all of these other issues. But I think a lot of people were kind of surprised to see how diligent UnitedHealth Group had been in building out this bank. And one thing that was really interesting to me is I talked to some independent physician practice owners for the paper, but afterwards I talked to some independent pharmacists who were saying how the bank also was affecting pharmacies, which wasn't initially really covered in any of the early reporting on this. And also, since the paper has come out, kind of attuning me to looking at how other healthcare conglomerates are considering moving into this banking realm and why that's so concerning.
Yeah, and that's a fear that I have about that. So one of the things I didn't know was that United Health's bank, Optum Financial, I guess it's now called, is one of the big four. There are four big ones in HSA accounts, right? And so they're the big one, and they make money on just about every way you can, right? There's fees, there's transfer fees, there's a closure fee. They're basically finding ways to make money off of the consumers that have these accounts. And most people who have these accounts have them through an employer, right? This is a companion to the high deductible health plan. And I guess if you're somebody who makes a lot of money, this is a great way to have a quote unquote investment vehicle that is not taxed until if you somehow make it to 65 and you haven't used very much of that money, you can start using it for other purposes. So it's like a backup to a retirement account, although it would be a terrible one, right? Because among other things that I learned, provides terrible interest rates. There's fees that are happening. So if you're somebody who's looking at this as like, oh, here's a great little vehicle for that extra overflow money I have, surprise.
A lot of the large insurers, even if they don't have their own bank, have partnered with some of the biggest HSA providers. So you still have that kind of like lock-in model. But yeah, I think the real beneficiaries of the high deductible health plan HSA model, which was created in 2003, Congress created the high deductible health plan option and created health savings accounts to incentivize consumers to get those plans. UnitedHealth Group was kind of ahead of the curve and acquired a HSA provider and also chartered its own industrial bank in Utah. And since 2003, high deductible health plans have grown really dramatically in popularity. They are not good products. They are not good for patients, but they often are less money upfront for very high deductibles. So it's much harder to access your benefits when you need them. And I think HSAs, like you said, have been marketed as kind of like an investment tool. Surely there are some people who have used them effectively, but the real beneficiaries of this model are UnitedHealth Group, which is not only making money on the insurance side through these high deductible health plans, which they're not only collecting premiums, but because the deductibles are so high, they don't have to pay out any claims until after the patient has hit that high deductible. And often it's unaffordable for them to do so. So they're not actually gaining access to the product that they're being sold. And because they are one of the largest HSA providers, they are earning dividends on HSA deposits. One kind of stat that really shocked me when I was working on this paper is that Optum Financial generated nearly $600 million in interest income, but only paid out $12 million of that to account holders. So the interest rates on these HSA accounts are often very low or even 0%. So I think the kind of financial incentives for having an account like this are often kind of overstated.
And that's why I wanted to talk about this too, because I don't think that that's very clear. I don't know if the employers, you mentioned this in the paper, may or may not be making choices for these HSAs based on what's best for their employees. They might not even know because these contracts are kind of opaque, just like contracts between, United Health and any of its providers are so massively opaque. Certainly that's the case with pharmacies. And so you might have this situation where employees are putting money in good faith into their HSA. They're earning way less interest than they would in a basic bank account, which right now many of them are paying somewhere around 1% or, maybe even as high or 3%. So they're not getting the benefit of that. But United Health is making, millions and millions in this spread off of everyday people, just like they do all the time with everything else. It's terrible.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, the bank piece of the UnitedHealth Group business model really crystallizes to me kind of the flywheel effect of how like UnitedHealthcare's insurance products have gotten much more expensive. They pay providers less. They impose much more onerous prior authorization requirements. That creates a market for something like a high deductible health plan, which is cheaper upfront, but a worse product overall. Employers are really, unable to keep up with double-digit cost increases for their employee health benefits year over year. They start trying to, shunt their employees into high deductible health plans. That happened to me at a previous job. They try to sweeten the deal by offering maybe $500 into an HSA. All of this is creating new products, new markets, new customers for UnitedHealth Group to earn money off of, to create that spread. And then now with Optum Bank's lending operations, physician practices that are getting, really fleeced by below cost reimbursement rates are now needing payday loans to tide themselves over month to month. Look who's ready to offer those payday loans at a 35% interest rate. Optum Financial, like they're just creating these problems and then creating solutions to those problems that of course create new problems. And it's really nefarious.
Yeah, total company store brings a whole new meaning to market capture. and no matter who you are, as a physician forced into a fire sale or as an HSA account holder, you have to pay to leave your account in most cases. Where are you going to go if you're going to move your account? I think you're writing about, or it might have been in the Consumer Finance Bureau report about the person who didn't know that their account had been transferred and they had to pay. And it was really just a transfer. It was literally a lateral move, and they were actually having fees deducted, their money taken away from them for something they had nothing to do with. And that's happening on a wide scale. 40 million people have HSA accounts, and I would bet that the vast majority, 99.9%, have no idea that this is going on and that United is making hundreds of millions of dollars off of their backs, and they have no say in this whatsoever. They're not sharing, just like they don't share with pharmacies and physicians' practices in all the money that they're taking, and they'd rather squeeze everybody dry and have it all for themselves, which is why they're, as of today, like number 3 in the, Fortune 10.
Yeah. Getting every year they move up. And I think it's the bank, even though it might seem like not core to their business model, when you hear UnitedHealth Group executives talk about their planning, they see this segment, this financial services and data analytics segment, to be what the provider services Optum Health segment was 10 years ago. And I think we've seen UnitedHealth Group has really, like all the big medicine insurance conglomerates, the insurance arm is almost secondary at this point. They're making the most money from their provider services arm. And I think the fact that UnitedHealth Group is positioning Optum Insight, under which Optum Financial, Optum Bank is housed, as kind of their next big growth area is really alarming, because it shows that they are, investing a lot of resources into this particular area. UnitedHealth Group is now the largest physician employer in the country. They have leveraged their monopoly in insurance into the provider services market, and now they're trying to do the same thing in this financial data market. And like you said earlier, Monique, there's really concerning implications for how this could spread even beyond healthcare, where we know it's really harmful, but this could even reach the industry boundaries itself.
Hello, my name is Andrew Russell. I am the co-owner of Elko New Market Family Pharmacy, and you might recognize me from the PBM on the Rocks podcast. I am also a proud DataScan user of 6 years. We decided to use DataScan in our pharmacy when we first opened. We were looking for a software vendor that met a good price point, one that was easy to work with, one that wasn't too complicated starting out. And DataScan checked all those boxes for us. Right away when we got in touch with them, they were on it. They wanted to make sure we were set up for success before we opened our door. DataScan is different from all the other software vendors that I've worked with. When you call DataScan, you get to talk to somebody right away, and they really genuinely help you fix your problems. Other software vendors that I have used, if you call, you wait on hold forever, you have to leave a message, they have to call you back, you go through a phone tree of options. DataScan is just hands down the most responsive software vendor that I've ever used. And I also can't say enough about how customizable the workflow is. It's very intuitive. The other thing that I like about DataScan, they support independent pharmacy and they support advocacy for independent pharmacy. They really do have the best interests of independent pharmacy in mind. And that is something that you cannot put a price on. But they have, and it's very low, which is nice. I couldn't think of a better software partner for an independent pharmacy than DataScan. I really can't.
DataScan Pharmacy Software. Independently owned software for independent pharmacies. Visit datascanpharmacy.com or call us at 877-222-7979 today.
So I think this is a good way to sort of transition to breaking up big medicine. AELP, American Economic Liberties Project, has the Break Up Big Medicine Coalition, of which PUTT is a part. But I'm going to ask this question, and I appreciate Lauren's patience in letting me ask all these ones about the bank. Do you have any sense of the bank or any of these financial things that they're doing are on Congress's radar at all?
Yeah, that's a great question. One thing that's really kind of hopeful for me is earlier this year, there was a hearing in Congress. There were actually several hearings in both the House and the Senate with the big insurance conglomerate CEOs. And during one of those hearings, there was actually some discussion of the fact that UnitedHealth Group has a bank. Representative Greg Murphy and Representative John Joyce, who are the co-chairs of the GOP Doctors Caucus, both of them are physicians themselves, asked questions about the fact that why does UnitedHealth Group, an insurance company, even have a bank? And I think, like we were talking about earlier, there are endless problems to solve in healthcare, but I think it is encouraging that Congress is at least aware of the fact that UnitedHealth Group has a bank and that it fits into this larger narrative of vertical consolidation and how these conglomerates are growing, not just horizontally and vertically, but in this like almost 3D manner to encompass, every element of the healthcare supply chain. And since we are seeing, more legislation that it would structurally separate these companies, whether it's PBMs from pharmacies or insurers from medical providers, wholesale drug distributors from medical providers, I think that creates a template for additional reforms that would prohibit these companies from also owning banks.
And we're looking to kind of break open that vertical integration black box that so many people on the Hill and across the country have been trying to understand. We know that it took a long time for some of our legislators to understand PBM is not a friendly acronym whenever they come into their offices. And so, we as pharmacy owners have been screaming about what Optum, United Healthcare, the three large big PBMs are doing, and then their insurance companies that they're integrated with now. And really, whenever providers started feeling that pinch and they saw their own colleagues get swallowed up, just like pharmacy owners do, getting bought out by these larger conglomerates like one of the chain stores, and not wanting to sell because they wanted to, they were forced to. And I really think that's when providers became more allies in this fight against PBM, insurance, big medicine. It's two sides of the same coin. These, companies really will not stop until they squeeze every single penny out of the patients that they just see as dollar signs. I mean, Emma, you hit the nail on the head whenever you said that this is just more avenues and more patients for them to kind of glom onto. And they don't even look at their pharmacy service as their number one money-making way anymore, which is crazy that UnitedHealth Group and Optum are not looking at the pharmacy patients as that. They're seeing those patients as a means to an end to get to that provider who is going to potentially be someone who could have to take out one of those payday loans. And if there was a payday loan company in the Fortune top 20, Congress would be screaming all over the place. So instead of, Optum Bank or Optum Financial, I think we should just call it the shady payday loan place on the corner. And maybe our legislators would understand a little more. But I think that as a pharmacy owner, we appreciate everything that AELP is doing to try to get this message out there. And I know that you have had some legislative allies as well in Break Up Big Medicine, people who we never thought would be allies in this fight. But it's wonderful that AELP has been able to get support from both sides of the aisle and really help push the fact that Break Up Big Medicine. We've seen it on the state side whenever they've been trying to make sure that PBMs could not own pharmacies in a couple of the states. And I think the next step could potentially be PBM-owned physician offices, insurance-owned physician offices also not being able to be licensed as a PBM in those states.
Yeah, exactly. And the appreciation is so mutual. I think the work that PUT and other independent pharmacy organizations have done has completely informed all the work that we do at AELP on the healthcare side. And also so much of what I hear from our other wonderful coalition members who are, other healthcare professionals, not necessarily pharmacists, is that they really look to pharmacists for guidance and inspiration. The pharmacists have been educating people about these issues for decades at this point. And I think so much of why we're seeing momentum now is because once legislators and regulators understood the PBM pharmacy integration problem, they were able to extrapolate those same harms to other forms of vertical integration. And they're now increasingly hearing from physicians, from therapists, from audiologists, from nurses who are dealing with these same issues in different healthcare contexts. So we owe so much of the credit and also so much of the progress to the work that pharmacists have been doing. And like you said, that this is a really bipartisan movement. At the state level, deep red states are 100% leading the way, not just on PBM and pharmacy structural separation, but Indiana passed a law last year that capped hospital prices and employer health plans. That's a really clear-cut example of where monopolization drives healthcare spending, and they are doing direct government price controls, and we should give them a lot of credit for doing that. And at the federal level, the Break Up Big Medicine Act is co-sponsored by Senators Elizabeth Warren and Josh Hawley. Whenever I mention that, people are like, I didn't know they agreed about everything. But they really do agree on this issue. And I think even the fact that, when banks came up in a congressional hearing, it was from the leaders of the GOP Doctors Caucus. This is not, a one-party issue by any stretch.
I really think that it will take those physicians in Congress, the providers that we're seeing stepping up and speaking out for their patients, because they were able to see that more on a routine basis than some of their other colleagues who may only get to hear some of the stories from their constituents or maybe from a family member who's going through, some issues with trying to get their prescriptions covered, service covered. There's so many different tentacles that Optum unfortunately covers now. We used to call this a game of whack-a-mole whenever you're talking about different legislation and different problems. And I mean, this is just like a sea of whack-a-mole. There's not enough mallets to make sure you're taking care of the problem because they are already creating more problems that they now have to solve. And then they get to come in there and be that quote hero for the provider or, for the entity. And if you caused the problem, you shouldn't be allowed to benefit from what you did.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think that is kind of like the strongest piece of evidence that this is a problem of monopoly power, that UnitedHealth Group is so big that even when it is ostensibly the victim of a multi-billion-dollar cyber attack, it still is profiting off of that crisis. And, in the same way that the PBM business model disadvantages both patients who are paying more for drugs and the pharmacies that are dispensing those drugs, the Optum Bank model is bad for consumers who have HSA accounts and for the healthcare professionals that need lending services and increasingly don't have small independent banks to rely on. Their business model has become so convoluted and complex because of the way private insurance works, and they really are driven into this like no-win situation. And to your point that when the crisis is at such an extreme level, we can't be nibbling around the edges with incremental legislative reforms. We need to fundamentally break up this business model that enables this type of profiteering. And in the paper and also in the work that we do as the Break Up Big Medicine Coalition, we're really trying to push for structural solutions. So, UnitedHealth Group can either be an insurer or it can be a healthcare services provider. It should not be able to be both. If you are a commercial enterprise, you should not be able to be a bank. And that is a really long-standing principle of U.S. law. We've gotten away from it, and I think it's been really damaging in other industries as well, particularly in like the auto industry where a lot of car manufacturers will have industrial banks to extend auto loans. Some of those industrial banks were the driving factor for massive bailouts during the 2008 financial crisis. Like this integration of commercial business and banks has proven to be disastrous throughout our history, and we need the same types of structural solutions, especially, maybe most especially, when that integration is happening in the healthcare space where literal lives are on the line.
And Emma, I think the work that AELP does really makes pharmacy owners and our advocates feel justified, that we're not crazy, that this is happening to other sectors within healthcare. I think that now, through your papers, Emma, and through the work that you guys have done, that the word is getting out that it is not pharmacy owners just stuck in the 50s and trying to keep their business model the same way. There is no way to compete against your competition that is setting your prices and making sure that their business model of then being able to be a loan shark for the providers that are sending you prescriptions that they end up paying us for. I mean, the wheel has so many different spokes. That really resonated with me whenever I read your paper, that we were not screaming into the wind. This was really their intent to try to drive up costs in order to keep the money that they saw as not being watched by anyone else.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, pharmacists have really been the canary in this coal mine, which I think is probably lonely work. I'm glad you're feeling like there's more consensus and kind of solidarity building. But yeah, it's really outrageous to think that a local independent pharmacy is going to be able to compete with Optum pharmacies. UnitedHealth Group is the third largest company in the US. It is also the third largest PBM. It is the fourth largest pharmacy operator. It is extending loans, managing HSAs, controlling the reimbursement rates. Like, that is not a fair fight. And so much of these structural legislative reforms is to say, let's level the playing field. Let's make sure that businesses are competing on the merits and not on illegal market power. And one example we often give of it's the PBM consolidation issue, not poor business management by independent pharmacies, is that, Walgreens, which a decade ago was valued at over $100 billion, essentially went out of business recently and went private in a $10 billion deal, lost 90% of its valuation, and was a huge, long-standing business that, because it doesn't have a PBM, cannot survive in the fight against these vertically integrated behemoths. So it's not just independent pharmacies that are struggling to survive in this environment. And I also think we want to, as a society, we need to have independent medical providers and pharmacies who care about their patients and aren't only in it to make money for shareholders, which again, like the separation of commercial business and banks, is a really long-standing core principle of how we have organized our economy, and we've just gotten away from it in recent decades. But this is kind of the aberration, not, having main streets that are thriving and independent businesses and the separation of corporate ownership, the corporate practice of medicine, the separation of, we shouldn't have any corporate ownership in healthcare because we know that there's just a fundamental conflict there. That also is a really long-standing kind of doctrine of American business and legislation. So I hope that we can get back to that.
And we look forward to the success of all of the initiatives that you and everyone at AELP have been pushing. How can we give our pharmacy owners, the patients listening, or anyone that's listening to this, the motivation to help, and how can they help in this effort?
If they're listening to this podcast, they are already ahead of the game, I think, and probably really aware of these issues. For pharmacists that are members of PUTT, we're so honored to have PUTT as a member of the Break Up Big Medicine Coalition, and we're working with our other coalition members that represent other healthcare professionals, patients, employers, other policy organizations that are really trying to push these types of structural separation reforms forward. If you are a patient and you're interested in these issues, please go to breakupbigmedicine.com. You can sign up and show your support there. We have a monthly newsletter where we show all the progress that is being made on these issues and opportunities to tap in when there are, good moments to call your legislators or testify. And, one thing that I'm trying to do in my personal life, learning about all of these problems is I'm trying to change all of my healthcare providers to independent businesses. This is not a problem that we can solve through individual choices, and I don't want to imply that it is. We need really significant legislative reforms. But in the meantime, I want to make sure that I'm supporting healthcare providers who have my health and well-being at heart and not corporate shareholders. So that's something that makes me feel like I have a little more agency in this process when it feels particularly bleak.
Absolutely. That's one more tool in your arsenal that you can use to kind of thumb the nose at Optum and all of the other healthcare conglomerates.
Because we talk about the market has to make the choice. At some point, all the laws will not make much of a difference if the market can't choose. And so much of what you've been talking about and the work you're doing is helping us as a country to understand that a lot of these choices are not within our grasp right now. We have to do something about it. And I've loved everything that you've had to say today, Emma. Thank you so much. Thanks for all the work you guys are doing.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for the great work Putt is doing. It's always a pleasure to have Putt on my calendar in any capacity. So it's been really nice to chat with you both.
You as well. Emma, thank you so much for all of your time. This has been a wonderful kind of mini deep dive into the world of Optum Financial and why vertical integration is an issue that everyone needs to be aware of because it can seep into other parts of your life, other industries. This is not really the time to bury your head in the sand and just cross your fingers and hope that this goes away. This is really the time to continue to educate yourself on these issues and really just try to spread the word so that we can get as much information out there as possible. Speaking of as much information out there as possible, the annual PUTT Summit is going to be coming up on September 23rd. So we hope that everyone can join us for that. Monique, it's always great to spend time with you on another episode of the PUTTcast.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. And thanks for letting me horn in as always with all my questions. I have so many always.
We love it. We welcome questions. And if you do have any additional questions, you can always reach out to me at lauren@truthrx.org. Happy to help point you in the way of the resources at Pharmacists United with Truth and Transparency. So thank you, ladies, for all of your time, and we look forward to talking to you again soon.